In London, England, there was a chimpanzee being observed in a laboratory. The chimpanzee saw a lot of chaotic news that happened on TV. At the same time, three masked men came to cover the CCTV around the laboratory. A few moments later, they managed to get into the laboratory. The three of them were animal activists who intended to release all the chimpanzees in the laboratory so that they could live freely. Before the three people released the chimpanzees in the laboratory, a scientist arrived. He asked the three people not to release the chimpanzees in the lab. He said that the chimpanzees had been injected with a virus to infect them. Then the scientists would study it further for medical purposes. The virus was called the rage virus, and one bite would be very dangerous. Unfortunately, the three people didn't believe what the scientists said. So, when one of the chimpanzees was released from its cage, it brutally attacked the female activist. Moments later, the rage virus spread. They all turned into zombies. Long story short, 28 days later, there was a courier named Jim who just woke up from his coma. It was found that Jim was hit by a car when he was about to deliver a package. Jim was confused when he saw the whole hospital in ruins. In fact, not only the hospital was empty of people, but on the highway in London, Jim also found no one. Jim continued to walk in an unsure direction and shouted for anyone who could hear Jim's voice, until Jim decided to enter a church. When Jim arrived at the church, Jim was very surprised to see a lot of people lying in the church. Then when Jim said hello, there were two people who had turned into zombies, stood up and ran after Jim. It wasn't just the two zombies, but the zombie priest and other zombies woke up and ran after Jim. Seeing this strange situation, Jim immediately left the church and tried to run away. Fortunately, there were two people who saved Jim. They were Selena, who was a pharmacist, and also Mark. Without thinking for a long time, Mark quickly took Jim away from there. Then the zombies were pelted with Molotov cocktails, which made them crash into a gas station. Then there was an explosion at the gas station. Jim, Selena, and Mark took the opportunity to hide in a supermarket in the mall. Jim then recounted the events he had experienced, from the accident, coma, until he regained consciousness. Jack was confused by the empty hospital and the fact that there was no one in London. Then Selena and Mark explained that there was a very fast-spreading virus. The virus caused humans to become zombies, including soldiers and government people also became zombies. They both also said that the last news they heard was that the spread of the virus was in Paris and New York. After that, broadcasts on TV and radio had stopped because the electricity was no longer functioning. Hearing Selena and Mark's explanation made Jim even more panicked and scared. Therefore, Jim planned to go to his parents by himself. But Mark warned that Jim should not go alone, and he could only go out during the day. The next morning, Mark and Selena followed Jim to Jim's house. When they arrived at Jim's house, the three of them smelled a foul odor that turned out to be caused by the corpses of Jim's parents. It is revealed that Jim's parents overdosed themselves rather than being torn apart by zombies. Jim's parents died with a picture of Jim on their chests. Behind the photo was a message that they wrote, "With endless love, we left you sleeping. Now we're sleeping with you. Don't wake up." Seeing his parents dead, Jim was very sad. Then Mark and Selena calmed Jim down. They told him that their parents' situation was much worse during the zombie outbreak because they were attacked by a horde of zombies while trying to escape. That night, Jim, Selena, and Mark slept at Jim's house. Unfortunately, Jim still couldn't sleep. He was still in shock from the death of his parents and the sudden spread of the virus. Then Jim played a video about Jim's moments with his family on the television. But suddenly, a zombie came in and attacked Jim. Thankfully, Jim wasn't bitten by the zombie, and none of the zombie's blood entered Jim's mouth. But apparently Mark was bitten by a zombie. Selena, who saw it without further ado, directly killed Mark by shooting him. Then Selena told Jim to clean up and get out of Jim's house before the other zombies came. On the way to another hiding place, Selena told Jim that they both had to kill people infected with the virus within 10 to 20 seconds before they turned into zombies. They didn't care whether their family, siblings, or friends who were bitten by zombies had to be killed immediately. Not long after Jim and Selena saw an apartment that had blinking lights. They both went straight to the apartment. Selena believed that there were still humans alive. Once they arrived at the apartment building, they had to climb the carts that were arranged into a wall. Then they climbed the stairs to the apartment unit that turned on the lights. However, there were two zombies who saw Selena and Jim's arrival, so the zombies were immediately chased. A few moments later, Jim and Selena managed to get to the apartment unit. In fact, the apartment was inhabited by a father and his daughter, Frank and Hannah. They both managed to defeat the two zombies who followed Jim and Selena. Jim and Hannah introduced themselves. Seeing that Frank and Hannah were very pleased to know that there were other humans who were still alive. Then Frank turned off the lights and treated them to a syrupy drink. They needed to save water. Frank then washed his beard and hair to make him look even fresher. Later that night, the four of them slept well. In the morning, Frank showed Jim the way to save water by putting hundreds of buckets on the rooftop so that the rainwater could be collected. But Frank found a problem. It has not rained for 10 days. Frank has also tried to make do but failed. After that, Frank showed the radio frequency he found a few days ago. Frank found audio recordings from the soldiers. The message was intended for living humans, that there were many humans who survived out there. The soldiers also said that they had found a solution to overcome the plague that occurred. The soldiers also told the location they were in, which was near the city of Manchester, that was safe from zombie attacks. According to Frank's calculations, they need about 2 to 3 days to arrive in Manchester. However, Selena thought that maybe the soldiers were already dead because what Frank found was a voice recording. In addition, Selena didn't believe that a vaccine or rage virus had been found. Frank and Hannah replied that there was no harm in trying to come to Manchester instead of continuing to stay in the city, because sooner or later the zombies would kill them. In the end, the four of them agreed to go to Manchester. They left in a car equipped with all the necessary supplies to survive. On the way, they saw a lot of zombie and human corpses. Until one time, they forced to enter a tunnel because that was the fastest route. After passing a pile of wrecked cars, Frank's car tires popped. Then they had to change the tire quickly. Unfortunately, the zombies started coming because they heard the noise when Frank's car passed the pile of broken cars. Thankfully, Frank managed to drive his car before the zombies attacked them. Then they were able to get to a supermarket where the food stock was still full. They quickly grabbed whatever they could take. Frank also took gasoline from the fuel tanker truck. While waiting for Frank, Jim entered a warehouse to see if there were any items that could be carried. However, while Jim was in the warehouse, a zombie approached Jim. Luckily, Jim managed to kill the zombie. Then Frank, Jim, Hannah, and Selena continued their journey. After a long journey, they stopped for a break. They decided to stop at a ruined building in the middle of the field of grass. By seeing Frank and Hannah's closeness, Selena chose to change her principles from one who was initially concerned with survival for herself into Selena, who realized the importance of togetherness. Selena remembered that Jim once said that humans need each other. Selena then slowly fell in love with Jim. Likewise, Jim began to love Selena. Later that night, they spent the night under the ruins of the building. The next day, they continued their journey to Manchester, until finally the four of them arrived in Manchester. From there, they headed towards the south. They then arrived at the location notified by the soldiers via radio. But they only saw soldiers' cars without finding a single soldier there. Frank was emotional because that place was their only hope. He continued to search for the whereabouts of the soldiers, but he couldn't find them. Then Frank was disturbed by a crow that ate a zombie dead body. Frank wanted to drive the crow away by kicking the door under the bird, but the unexpected happened. Zombie blood got into Frank's eyes. Realizing he would become a zombie, Frank told Hannah to stay away from him while giving his last message. A few seconds later, Frank turned into a zombie and was about to attack his daughter. From the unexpected direction, there were soldiers who were forced to shoot Frank to death. It turned out that the soldiers were watching the four of them to find out if the people who came were really safe. The soldiers then took Jim, Hannah, and Selena to their headquarters, which was located a few kilometers from the place. When they reached there, Major Henry welcomed them. Major Henry took them to their rooms. He even invited them to take a warm bath. Afterwards, Selena cried because she saw Hannah, who had lost her father. Jim calmed Selena down and kissed her. Then Jim went to Major Henry. He He then said that Jim and his friends would be disappointed to find out that the place they went to was not the headquarters of the soldiers, but an ordinary house. There were only 9 soldiers, no helicopters or hospitals. The solution to the plague was not a cure, but a place to stay that was safe enough. Major Henry explained that there was an iron fence surrounding the house, and there were many mines in the outside area. Then Major Henry took Jim around the headquarters area. He also led Jim to the area behind where there was a zombie named Mailer who was locked up. The zombie was used as a research subject for soldiers to study the virus that caused a virus infection. In the evening, they all ate together. However, the eggs that were cooked were rotten eggs. In addition, almost all soldiers looked uncivilized, except for a soldier named Farrell. Major Henry vomited his food. The soldiers mocked each other, and many inappropriate words were said. Shortly after that, a horde of zombies came. The soldiers immediately prepared to shoot the zombies to death. On the other hand, there was one soldier who wanted to harass Selena. Jim was the one who saw it and immediately fought the soldier. But Jim couldn't move against the soldier. Fortunately, Sergeant Farrell came and helped Jim. Major Henry then came to break them up. He told his subordinates to get rid of the bodies of the zombies into the forest. Then Major Henry apologized to Selena for what his subordinates did. After that, Major Henry invited Jim to talk. There, Major Henry said that a few days ago there was a soldier who wanted to commit suicide. He thought there was no future in this world. Therefore, Major Henry deliberately announced the location of the headquarters over the radio in the hope that other humans would come there, especially women. This was done so that they could reproduce and the human race would not become extinct. In other words, Selena and Hannah will be used as sex slaves for the soldiers. Jim, who heard Major Henry's explanation, directly invited Selena and Hannah to leave the place. Unfortunately, one of the soldiers hit Jim until he was almost unconscious. Sergeant Farrell, who knew that, wanted to help Jim. But other soldiers captured Jim and Sergeant Farrell and locked them up overnight. The next day, they were both taken to the forest where the zombies were dumped. The 2 soldiers wanted to finish off Jim and Farrell, but had no idea how to proceed. Eventually, one of the soldiers fired a bullet and almost knocked Farrell out. While the argument was going on, Jim took the opportunity to escape. At first, Jim hid by sleeping among the corpses. After the 2 soldiers left, Jim continued his plan to escape. On the other hand, Hannah and Selena were asked to beautify themselves by dressing up and changing their clothes. But when some soldiers took Selena to a room, she was almost harassed once again. Luckily, Selena was able to send them away with the excuse that Major Henry asked Selena and Hannah to dress up first. Soon after the soldiers leave, Selena persuaded Hannah to commit suicide instead of becoming a sex slave. Sadly, one of the soldiers saw them about to commit suicide and immediately threw away Hannah's medicines. Shortly afterward, the siren of the roadblock sounded. Jim deliberately sounded the siren so that the soldiers would come to him. Later on, Major Henry and one of his subordinates came to hunt Jim down. Seeing Major Henry's arrival, Jim instantly prepared to fight them by provoking the zombies to finish them both off. Long story short, Jim managed to get into the military headquarters without being noticed by anyone. Then Jim released the chains that bound the zombie Mailer. In the meantime, Selena and Hannah were already dressed up and wearing beautiful red dresses. The soldiers were about to have an orgy. But suddenly a zombie Mailer came to bite one of the soldiers there. Selena, who knew that, took Hannah to run away from there. But there were soldiers who knew they were out of the room, then brought them to a separate room. The chaos ensued and the zombie Mailer, assisted by one of the soldiers he had bitten, continued to attack the other soldiers. Then the soldier who became a zombie approached Hannah and Selena. Hannah was nearly caught by the zombies while hiding behind a mirror. Meanwhile, Jim managed to kill one of the soldiers and provoke zombies to attack other soldiers. Until Jim noticed Selena in a room that would be taken away by a soldier. Jim instantly attacked the man and killed him. In the end, Jim, Selena, and Hannah came back together. They planned to escape as soon as possible. But when Hannah got in the car, it turned out that Major Henry was waiting inside the car. Then Henry shoots Jim, who was still outside the car. Meanwhile, Hannah must drive. However, she drove the car backwards until the zombie mailer managed to catch Henry from the car and attacked him on the spot. After that, the three of them ran away. Fortunately, Selena, who was a pharmacist, was able to save Jim, who was injured. Long story short, 28 days later after the incident that night, Jim woke up in a room at a house located in a hilly area. During their stay, they heard the sound of military jets crossing the air. The soldiers were looking for human survivors, so Selena sewed a giant piece of fabric. Selena completed the sewing, which turned out to be a letter-shaped cloth with the word hello. They placed it in the field so that if a military jet passed by, they could clearly see the hello words. On the other hand, zombies were seen dying from starvation, until finally the jet passed by again. Jim, Hannah, and Selena were sure that the soldiers in the jet could clearly see the hello words they made and would send help as soon as possible.